Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Karak with Mehreen show. I'm so excited about today's guest. She has come all the way from Canada. She is a proud brown girl who uses her platform to empower other brown girls by sharing relatable experiences about things that make us proud South Asians. I'm very excited to have this conversation about all things Desi cultures and Desi households with Neeti Sharma. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh my gosh, you made me sound so amazing. You're hyping me up.
I have to.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Ready to get into it.
Yay, I'm very, very excited. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about three themes, if you may, and we'll start off by talking about growing up brown in a white country, in a Western country, how that experience is like. Then we'll move on to expectations, placing high expectations on children in a Desi household, why that happens, what are the consequences. And then lastly, we'll talk about the way affection is portrayed or shown or displayed in a Desi household and what are the consequences of that as well.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited. There's a lot of good, juicy topics to talk about. Yeah. So we'll start off, right? As I was mentioning that growing up in a brown family, but in a Western country, I think that's very different from me. I'm brown, I'm Pakistani, but I grew up, born and raised in the UAE. And I think our experiences are similar in some ways, but also distinct in other ways. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, how was it like going home to obviously a brown household, but then going to school where you see a lot of, white individuals, Western people, Canadians. Mm-hmm. So how was that experience like?
Yeah. So I guess living in Canada, there are brown people now, but when I was growing up 20 years ago, there was not as many as here. The UAE, I feel like there's a large amount of Desi people, but in Canada it was really definitely a minority. And then I specifically grew up in a very white Caucasian town, a very small town. So I grew up I live in Toronto, but there's pockets outside that are very secluded. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I grew up. So I remember we have elementary and then high school. So in elementary school it was in my whole grade, there was two colored people. I'm not even talking brown people, I'm talking colored people. So there was me, and then there was one Asian girl, and she was adopted. So it was very the standard there is not to be brown was definitely standing out. Yeah. For, at least where I grew up, it was not the cultural, it was not the norm. And so I feel there's positives and there's negatives to it, but obviously it's very different when you're growing up with people who are not looking like you and are not like you. And then, especially with immigrant parents, coming from India in the household, it feels very similar to how maybe you would have grown up, or even somebody in India, because the values, the traditions, the food,
those remain.
Yeah, the music intact. Is still there, but then as soon as you leave the house, it's completely different. Yeah. And so I feel when I grew up and I would go to school, it was very much about fitting in for me. It was I would just want to be a chameleon and just fit in, because it's you already are standing out probably because of how you look, or you're the one brown family in the community. Actually, you just reminded me. So when I was growing up, I remember I moved around a little bit, but mostly I grew up in this one town that was very white. And I remember on the first day I made a friend, and she was oh, let's hang out after school. And I was okay, that's amazing. I made a friend so quickly, yay. And so we were walking. So I was yeah, do you want to come to my house? We had just moved in. And so we were walking, and there's different areas in that town around the school. There was we have something called community housing. Okay. So it's kind of government sponsored housing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Which is one pocket, and then there's other pockets. And so I remember we were walking, and we walked past the government housing to my area.
Okay.
And I remember she was oh, you don't live here. Like she would like literally, and obviously we were young, like maybe like 12 years old, like you don't know maybe you don't know about her. I don't know, I don't want to say, but like
still
it was like an assumption that like if you are of color, because especially in that kind of town, like you wouldn't know anything else probably.
Wow.
So she was like, wait, like you don't live in this neighborhood, like you live over there. And she was like, oh wow, like so shocked. And I remember like I didn't understand like why that was surprising to somebody, because to me it was like why would you assume
that? Yeah, but now especially when you're young.
Yeah, now I get it. But yeah, so I think that was like my first taste of like that there are like stereotypes maybe, or there are cultural norms. Like I don't know if I was like naive. but
obviously you were growing up in that environment, and you, in your mind, you're like, oh, we're all just people, we're trying to make friends, and then as you get into it, you see and you witness that, and then you're like, what is this? And in the beginning, in your first instance, you don't realize that it's a stereotype or it's racist or any of that. You kind of just like brush it off. But as they occur more and more, you start connecting the dots. Yeah. Which is probably what happened.
Yeah, now I get it. Like now I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Yeah. But no, anyway, so I feel like I spent a lot of my elementary, high school even, like just trying to fit in. Like even like if we talk about beauty norms, like the standard of beauty growing up was like white and blonde. Like that's what's desired. That was what was attractive. So it was like lightening your hair, like doing things like that was like what would make you look good. Like I wouldn't embrace like features. Like I have like naturally curly hair. I would never embrace that because that was like not the norm. Wow. You know, like so it was always just trying to fit in. I feel like even like there were parts of me and my culture now that I love, but I hated them back then. And like even I would still get embarrassed to say things, but like when people would ask like, oh, like, why do your parents have an accent? Like, I feel like I wouldn't give them, like, I wouldn't tell them, like, oh, well, our first language is Hindi. Like, I wouldn't,
would you feel embarrassed?
Yeah, I would feel so embarrassed, even, like, religion-wise.
Wow.
Like, now I look back and I'm like, I would never, like, talk about what religion I am. Or even Diwali. Like, we celebrate Diwali, but I would never talk about it.
Wow.
To me, it was, like, yeah, like, doing things like wearing, like, a suit and, like, going to a grocery store. I would never have done that because I would have known everybody in the town and they would be like talking because it would be so shocking to them. So it was just like, I think that the positive to that is that you really learn to adapt. Like I think that I
become more flexible and things like that.
Yeah. And I think I can like connect with all types of people because I've been in situations where like we can have like nothing in common, but we can still be friends. Connected. Like, do you know what I'm saying? So I feel like in that way, it was very different. I think here, probably for you, like there's so many like, you know, Indian, Pakistani people that it's like, it doesn't feel like you're out of place.
For sure. I think that's very interesting what you talk about because I was reading lots of stories of there's this article that I read about this woman who was also raised, I think, in the US, but she was, I think, Indian or Pakistani. And she was saying that in the beginning, when she would embrace her identity, her cultural identity, people would bully her, people would make fun of her, and then naturally, as she grew up, she was like, okay, to fit in, what I have to do is become more white. So I need to be less brown, I need to be more white. So she only hung out with like with white people, made white friends, and she was like, anytime she would see any brown girl, she would try to run, like stay away from them because then it would go back to her, bullying phase, Yeah. So I think when I was reading that, it was just surprising to me. And I didn't acknowledge that, being raised in an environment where you're the only person of color or you're the only brown person, it can be very different from the environment that I grew up in. Even though I don't live in Pakistan, I never lived in Pakistan. I was born and raised outside of Pakistan, but I was surrounded by, as you said, Indians, Pakistanis. I didn't feel out of place, even though maybe my mindsets, sometimes I had issues with like the way I would think, the way other people would think, because the way my parents raised me is different from how other parents would have raised them. So I had that those conflicts, but I didn't feel out of place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so being proud of my culture, even though I didn't feel out of place, that did come eventually. Like I think in the beginning, maybe because we were all exposed to like Western media, movies, things like that. So even when we were younger, we would aspire to be like that. So I think as I grew up, it took some time to be proud of like all of these beautiful things about my identity, but I think it's faster and it's easier compared to being raised in the West, in a different,
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I feel even in India, like when I go back, everybody idolizes the West.
Yes.
And it's just, even here, I don't know like,
here as
how
well,
much.
Yeah.
But it's like crazy to me because I'm like, I am there idolizing
here
in like people in India, like just even like Bollywood, like actresses.
Wow.
Like we are idolizing, and like it's funny because even things like nowadays, like me and like my friends and I have a brother, like we'll listen to like only Punjabi music, and I'll go to India and my cousins are like, what are you guys listening to? Like they're listening to like Taylor Swift. And I'm like, it's so funny because it's like almost what you don't have, it's like that's what you want, right? Like grass is always greener. Like I'm like trying to feel more connected to India, whereas like people in India are here out like idolizing the West. Like it's so funny because it's backwards. Like
and that's so true because I grew up being like, I have to go to the US, like I have to go to Canada, I have to study there. Like that was my dream growing up. I was like, I need to, like that is the biggest dream. And I remember the first time I went to the US, like I got emotional because I was like, this is what I've wanted for so long and I'm finally here. But I love it there. It's so much fun and I love meeting the people there, but you cannot compare it to your own culture. You know what I mean? So it's different. It's different. I think there's beauty in all those countries. There's beauty in the West. There's beauty here. But I think just that element of being proud of your identity is important. You no matter where you are, just not losing that is important.
But do you still feel like you want to move there? Like, or are you happy here?
I think that I've lived there for a few months for summer programs, things like that. But I think that desire to stay there for a few years, like work there or study there, that's still there. It's very much still there. And I would love to do it because I know there, again, I'm saying there's advantages and beauties in all cultures. And I know when I went to the US that the diversity that I see there and also the type of people that you meet in colleges, the whole campus college life, it was just so different from my experience. So I think that craving is always there. Yeah,
I think it's with everybody who doesn't live in the West. Like, you know, like it's anybody I talk to, they're always like, no, but I still want to go. And I'm like, okay, no, I can see it because it's movies, it's like Netflix, like it's Hollywood, like it's glamorized.
But do you think it's as the way as it seems like in the movies?
I think I'm biased because I grew up there. Like I don't know anything else. Sense. So it's like always like I like, you know what I'm saying? Like I will look at India and say, wow, look at all the things that they had that I didn't have. But I will say Canada is different than the US.
Okay.
I think the US is what everybody, when you see like high school, when you see like those like American like stereotypes, like all the things that look so fun and exciting, it's definitely much more in the US than it is in Canada. Like Canada is like, we don't have like that big prom and like all that stuff we would grow up like watching. Like we have it to a lesser degree.
So then did you want to go to the US or did you want...
That's like a whole story in itself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's a whole story in itself. But I really wanted to go to the US.
Okay.
And I specifically wanted to move to LA. Like, I don't know what I had in my mind. I was
Hollywood.
Like, yeah, like I'm telling you, like I was like, I idolized it. And then I applied and I got into graduate school there. I was going to do my PhD. And then last minute, this was like not that long ago. This was in March.
Oh, wow.
So not even a year ago. I just decided no. And that was like a whole thing in itself. Like that was like a education crisis.
Wow.
What am I doing with my life crisis?
Oh yeah, like and even
just like
phase that yeah.
And then like also leaving my family, which I never thought of. To me it was like, no, I can move across. Like it's not even compared to here, like it's not far.
It's not
like,
that far.
Like, I don't know. It's still North America, but I didn't even think of like how leaving my family would be. And like
so that was the hard part? One of the hard parts?
I would say like maybe like top 3. Because I think like I was always like, no, I can leave. Like, what do you mean? But there's like, I think it is because we're Desi. Like, I don't know if it's everybody, but there was like some value like that I was just like, I can't leave. Like, I didn't feel and it was a 6-year program. First of all, it wasn't like 1 or 2 years. Oh no, I think if it was 1 or 2 years, that would not really be a factor.
Yeah, that makes sense as well.
It was 6 years, and to me, it was like, I don't know. I was like, do I want to be across so far for 6 years? I'm stuck there. There's other aspects, like if you get a like certification in the US, I wouldn't necessarily be able to work in Canada.
Oh, okay.
So then it was like
logistical.
Yeah, is it even possible for me to come back? So I could be stuck there forever.
Yeah, it makes
but
sense.
That's like a whole other thing.
So do you think that's because of how you because of the collectivist environment where your family is so important? So I think that value was with you growing up, which is why it's hard to let go.
Yeah. And it's not that I would never leave. Like, I think it's not that I would never move away from them, but I almost think like when you grow up, like back to the growing up, like when you grow up in a place where there wasn't that much of my culture around me, it's like you almost become so tight knit with your family, because it's like we only have us. Like, it's not like we're surrounded by a huge Desi community here. And I think that did impact me more than I thought. I never thought it would be like to this extent where like I wouldn't have left, but I think it really made me realize, like,
that's so interesting. And I think that's so true, because like when you were saying that because they were the only Desi people, or like people like you that were around you, you don't want to lose that. And I think because when you were saying that it was too hard for you to leave your family, I was thinking about it, and of course I cannot, I love my family so much, but for me it was like I felt like it was easier because I also moved out. Even though I didn't move to a different country, I live in different cities from my family, and it was hard, but it was not as hard as I thought. And I think what you articulated could be the reason is that I'm always surrounded by Desi cultures. Because when I went to the US, I did like a 2-month program there. So I stayed there for 2 months. Yeah. And I mean, I've never missed my family that much because I mean, I love my family, and I don't see them every day. Even here, sometimes I see them once a month. Yeah. But then when I was in the US, all the way to the other side of the world where there's not a lot of Desi people around me, where I'm not exposed to like Desi music as much anymore, like even the food, that's when, you remember them. So I understand what you mean in that sense. As you said, like you always miss what you don't have. Yeah. So
I live on my own. I just live like 30 minutes
Okay,
from
you live near your family. Okay,
so I get, that's, I feel like was much different. Like, I feel like that's actually a perfect balance, because I feel I'm still getting, best balance. I can still go home any day and get food. Like,
exactly. I don't have to. Best thing. That's actually the best thing. So, was it hard to move out of your family's house? Was that something that was difficult to navigate with your family? Because obviously even your family wouldn't want you to move, even if it's just 30 minutes away.
A lot of people ask me this, and I think I got really lucky because my parents themselves in India lived on residence. Okay. Like, they went to university. That's how they met. So, so like I think for them, it wasn't as big of a shock. But I think most people, like a lot of the Desi girls that I know, like a lot of them were not allowed to move out. Like, they would commute. Like, I went to University of Toronto, so you could commute. I could have commuted. But I think that they were almost like, my mom was actually very encouraging, because she was almost like the self-development that you're going to have just like living on your own, like cooking for yourself. Like, it's different, I think. I don't know how it is here actually, but there it's
in cooking?
Yeah, like you have to cook for yourself. Yeah. Like, there's no like...
If you're alone, completely alone, then like for me, but usually they have house help.
Like, I know in India and stuff, like even on the residences, like they have like cleaning.
Oh yeah. And they have in dorms they have cleaning. Yeah. Oh, so they don't have that? Like,
no.
Oh, okay.
Like very rare. I've never heard. Okay. There's no cleaning. Yeah. Like, no. So it's there's like meal plans, like for the first year. Just for the first year, but so there was a lot of like, she was like the development you're gonna have, and even just the relationships I made, like the friendships, I think it was different than if you just go to school to study and come back. So that's why I was okay. Sure. But I think a lot of girls will use, not girls and guys, they will use like, I think like the program as like an excuse sometimes to be able to move. Like, if there's a very good program that's like 4 hours away, I know like girls in my high school who would like who were brown, there were a couple who were like purposefully like, I'm gonna apply like to like the school 5 hours away just to that program so I can leave.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because like a lot of them, they didn't have that to them was like the only like shot of independence. And like using education almost as a reason that, you know, that they could leave. Otherwise, like there's no reason like how they could kind of get this like freedom.
That's, you know, when you were mentioning that it was very hard for you to think about moving abroad, the first thing that came to my mind was I just assumed that for brown, I know it's different for you, but just generally for brown people, when they live with their families, even especially in college, they crave for that level of independence to, you know, stay on their own and things like that. So for me, when you were mentioning that, you know, maybe it's because of the value you have with your family, that's for sure true. But I've always heard people wanting to move for that little sense of freedom. And I'm not saying that when you live in a brown family, you know, you're so restricted, you can't do anything. Like, of course it's not like that.
Yeah.
But every person wants to have some level of freedom where, you know, they can go at a time they want, leave the house at whatever time they want, come back at whatever time they want. They don't need to always tell their parents where they are. And I mean, these are little things. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it can play a role if it happens every day. You know what I mean? So when you were mentioning that people usually try to apply to the furthest program, like that's when it just clicked, because that is what I've seen
mostly, right?
And most of them are not able to move to a different city or to move to a different country. You know, they just have to deal with it. So that was a interesting point.
Yeah.
But why do you think they crave for that freedom? Like what is freedom from what?
I think what it is it's a feeling of like restriction. I don't know if it's like curfew or it's like going out, or it's kind of like, you know, like having like, for example, I don't know here, but I know like for most AC people, like having things like sleepovers is not usually allowed. Things like that. I don't know if it's boys, like girls, like dating. Like I think it's like, I don't know, partying, like that kind of stuff, like it's not going to fly over well, like in a Desi household. So I don't know, like I think that's probably what it is. Like it's like that sense of like, I can do whatever I want without having to like maybe even meet expectations. You know, like maybe there's like an image that they feel that they have to uphold in the home that like, and it's always like you want what you can't have, I've noticed. Like it's the more restrictive, people who grow up in the most restrictive, like, you know, homes or maybe with the most rules, not that it's bad necessarily, they end up being, I think, the ones who want to kind of like do the complete opposite, like rebel the most.
So true. I've always talked about this. I think the more restrictions you place, the worse it's gonna be.
Yeah,
it's just gonna result in the opposite, because when they get that little door of opportunity, they go wild.
Yeah,
you know. So it's true. Like that's what I've seen so many times.
Yeah,
and so I think that placing restrictions in a household, of course there are certain rules that you have to follow. This is normal, every household should have that's true. It's just the extent to which you place the restriction and like how many restrictions you're placing as well. But yeah, I think there's pros and cons to everything.
Yeah,
so that's just how it is. And when you were talking about image, and that was an interesting point, because it's a good segue to the whole idea of placing expectations on you as a Desi child. That's very normal in Desi households. Usually, you know, you have academic expectations to dress or look a certain way or talk a certain way and things like that. So first of all, what kind of expectations are placed?
I was actually, when you were saying that, I was thinking, even, I don't know if you're like eldest daughter.
No, I'm not.
Okay, but there's like even like
you're the oldest daughter.
I am. Yeah, yes. There's even, I find so many like eldest daughter expectations. Like even on TikTok and stuff, there'll be like jokes about it. They're like, oh, eldest daughter in a Desi household, like no wonder you have to go to therapy. Like there'll be like so many like memes, and I just think like there's expectations. Even I feel like for like, I think when parents immigrate, especially to the West, like I don't know about here as much, it's almost like they've sacrificed a lot, which they have. They have sacrificed. They've left their family behind a lot of the times. It's not an easy life. Like in Canada or America, like the way that you have a support system maybe back home, they don't have that there, especially new immigrants, like first generation immigrants, right? Sure. So I think there's almost an expectation, specifically the one that would stand out to me is like success wise. That's the one I think I felt the most. Like there are other ones, of course, like even just like societal expectations, you know, taking care of your parents, like morally, like there's expectations that way. But the success one, I think because they've sacrificed so much for a better life, that's why they came all the way. It's like, well, you better live up to that now. Like, you know what I'm saying?
So what do you mean by success? Let's break it down a little more. What does that mean, success expectation? Is it like getting a good job or getting good grades? Like, what does that mean?
I think for me, at least, it starts off as getting good grades when you're younger, right? But I think more generally, it's getting a good job, like having a stable income. I think just like being able to take care of your family, even just like, you know, in our culture, like taking care of your parents when they're old, like that is a huge, like in the West, that's not a concept. Like that's not a thing. Like they don't even think like taking care of parents. Like they're like, what do you mean? Like they're going to be on their own. And it's like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like it's so shocking to tell somebody like you, right? But it's almost like if you are successful, you'll be able to take care of your family. You'll be able to like take care of your parents. You'll just have a stable life, I think. A better life.
Yeah.
Which is like why they came here. Leading me to talk about how I felt very like high academic. I think a lot of Desi people do. I don't want to like generalize, but I think there's a lot of academic pressure on Indian people and Pakistan, like it's just Desi people in general, because my whole theory behind this is like, okay, tell me what you think. But I think that because in India, Pakistan, like just South Asian countries, there's so much competition because the population is such a big population that like if you are not super successful or I don't know, like a dentist, a doctor, something, like it's hard for you. Like it's hard to like almost sometimes have a decent life. That's at least what I have seen, or even just society will make it seem sometimes.
So you're saying that because there's so much competition with other South Asians that it's harder for you to succeed? Is that what?
No, it's harder for them. Like it's harder for them because there's so much competition.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a fair point, because I think that when you were talking about competition, it just reminded me more of the comparison element, because I think that one of the main reasons why parents probably put such expectations on you is what you just articulated, which is that, you know, they've traveled all the way, they've gone through so much, they've seen so much, and they don't want you to go through that, which is why in their intention, it's like the most positive intention, which is that they want you to have a stable lifestyle, a stable career, stable growth, where you don't have to go through like downs and ups and all these fluctuations that they have seen. So I think that I completely agree with that. And the second element is also, for me, what I was thinking was comparison. So I think that in our culture places a lot of emphasis on what other people think and what other people are saying. So I think there's also this pressure that comes in because they're always thinking about, oh, what that cousin is doing, what their niece or nephew is doing. And so that comparison element comes in as well in their minds, which adds on to the pressure. So I'm not sure about the competition, even though that does make sense. I was thinking more of like the comparison element when
that too though, like even like if you think about it, like in Canada or America, they're calling, like our parents are calling the people back home to tell them, oh, look what this person, oh, look what my daughter, like she became a doctor, my son became like a lawyer. They're not telling other people in Canada or America because they don't care. Do you know what I'm saying?
They only care about the people who are looking at them.
Yeah, but no, but even the people in America and Canada, like who are not brown, they're gonna be like, that's nice.
Yeah, they're just like, okay,
good for you. But it's the people in India who are like, because that's the society there. Like it's all, I don't know if it's show off or it's like,
what why do you think that is?
I think it's just show off. Like I don't know, that's just how it is. And
that's interesting because like this instinct to show off, it's there in all cultures. Like every individual, it's like human nature to like kind of to have that ego. But it's different, I think, just the way you showcase it perhaps in in South Asian cultures.
I think it's much more like just open. It's not subtle. Like they're not subtle.
Not at all. And like they're proud of it.
Yeah, they're like, oh, look what my daughter became. Like
it is cute. Like I know, like when my dad, you know, when he talks about my sisters or when he talks about me, like you feel nice. Like, you know, it feels like he's proud of you, which is why, you know, they're talking about you. It's just funny when you think about it, because like one of the reasons they're doing it is also because they want the other
people to be like, wow, like look at you guys, like your daughters are amazing. Like I don't know, like they kind of and I think it's pure. Like I do think a lot of it is like it's pure. Like they're like, look at how amazing my child is doing, and like they almost kind of want to show it off. But I also think there is an aspect of it that's like comparison. Yeah, that's what exactly. It is. Like, yeah.
And so you going back to what you were talking about, being the oldest child and having certain responsibilities, what did you feel being the oldest child? What kind of responsibility or expectations were put on you? You were saying academically.
Yeah.
Were there any other things that are specific to an older child? It's probably because, like, I guess academically, because they want you to be the role model for the rest of your siblings.
Yeah. I would say like mostly for me, at least, it was academics. Like for I like my dad used to say to me, like we came from India to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can now go from Canada to like Harvard. Like you could go to like, you know, like the top of the top, because like we came from India to Canada and you take it one step further. And I would be like, what's Harvard? Like I'm like 10 years old. Like, wait, what is that? Like, you know what I'm saying? So I feel like at least for me, the bar was very high, because it was like, well, look how far we came. Now you take it one step further. Like, why can't you? Like, if people from India are dying to go to like Harvard and Princeton and Yale, you know these schools, right?
Of course.
So yeah, like if you can do it from Canada, look how much easier it is for you. Right? And I would be like, oh my god, like wow, sure. This is so I really grew up with like very high, like I don't know if it's everybody, but very high expectations.
This is true. I think that I've seen this quite a lot. The type of expectations may vary, like in terms of, oh, go to Harvard. I don't know if that's for everyone. I mean, that was definitely for me as well growing up, so I relate. But even if it's not go to Harvard, it's like you have to get 100%. You have to get like the highest grade. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how did that affect you though? Like, how do you think that affects people who are in that scenario, the children?
I think there's so much. I don't think people realize how much it affects so many different aspects of your life. Like I'm literally going to relate it to dating, which is like, you're going to think it's the most like absurd thing. But like, I think what it does is now obviously it depends how your parents are like going about it. To me, I think there's encouragement and like pushing somebody to succeed. But I think when you're young, you don't understand sometimes the difference. You kind of attach your worth, I think, to this like performance, whether it's academic or maybe it's like sports wise or something else that you're doing. But like, I know I totally intertwined like academic performance, like grades, literally like getting hundreds on everything, like my report card, like to my worth. And I think what I learned subconsciously, like even though now I know it's not true, was that I'm worthy, I'm good enough. My parents are only like gonna like think I'm great when I get these certain grades, when I get like, you know, like all the hundreds, or I get in the top like 2%, or when I do great on this exam, like then I'm good enough. And so I think it affects like your worth, your self-worth so much. And I think it also creates a lot of people who become like extremely career driven, but not in like always a positive. I think being driven in your career is amazing, but like sometimes hyper fixated on like performance. Like, you know, I need to do more. And it's, if you ask people who are like this sometimes, who are never content career wise, or who are never like, need the next degree, or who need, you know, more pay all the time, like if you ask them why they're never content, sometimes I think it's because you're searching for something that you never got, and you probably will never get there because you're like, your self-worth is so attached to it. And I think that that's what happened to me. Like I think I really started to attach my self-worth to how I do academically, but not even that. It was more like my parents' approval.
Yes.
It was like, that's what I want so bad. And it's like, okay, if I just study harder, if I just get like 100, like then I'm good enough. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's crazy, because when I talk about my experience, I think that I loved the way my parents raised me. I loved my childhood, my upbringing. It was great. But it's true that there were certain expectations, even if it was not direct. Maybe when I was really young, it was direct, but as I grew older, it was more in subtle ways. Like, for example, if I would get a really good grade, that's when like I would see them really happy and proud. So then naturally you're just like, okay, this is what I need to do to make them proud. And so always I was just like, I have to get a really good grade. And even if I got like an A instead of an A star, my parents would be happy. Like they would be happy, but I was not satisfied because I was like, I could have made them happier. Like they could have been happier if I just, put in a little more effort. Like I still remember times when I think I got like an A and not an A star. And like when I told my mom, like she was happy. She's like, oh, wow, this is great and stuff. And then I was like explaining to her, I could have gotten an A star. And she's like, no, you did great. And then I think the grade was changed and then it became an A star or something. And then I told her, okay, I got an A star. It's fine. And she was like laughing. She was like, it's okay.
Yeah,
like,
she's like, it doesn't affect me.
She was laughing about it. But I don't know what was wrong with me. I was just so like, I have to get the perfect grade.
But I have a question. Wait, so do you think that you wanted that A star for yourself or for them?
That's the thing. Like, I think that when I grew up, it was about making my parents proud. But then I became so attached to it that then it just became about like, this is me. I always have to get the best grade. And then it just became like me wanting to make myself
yourself,
because I felt like I'm capable of that. So I felt like it was good. Like I was happy that my parents put in those expectations for me when I was younger, because as I grew up, it just naturally made me more hardworking. Like I always wanted to strive more. I know that this can lead to certain toxic behaviors. Like I know for me as well, there was a period of my time where I was like, I'm not gonna go out. I'm just gonna stay home and study all day. And now when I look back, I'm like, wow, like what the hell is my life? Like that's all I would do. But I'm still happy I went through that and I understood like, okay, I still want to be hardworking, but I need to know my balance, you know? So I don't regret anything. Like I'm still happy with what it led me to becoming, but I now understand why I was the way I was because of how I was.
But when your mom, like when she was kind of like, okay, you got an A star now, like, okay, like it's not, you know what I'm saying? She didn't have like, did you still feel good about it? Or were you kind of like, oh, I thought she would have reacted more?
So I think like, because eventually became a pattern where my mom was just like, my parents eventually didn't care. Like they're like,
we already know she's smart. Okay, another one.
But yeah, at some point they just didn't care. So for me, whether they were happy or not, like I just knew that I had to get an A star.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
I think my difference was I was doing it for them.
Okay.
I don't think I was doing it for myself.
Yeah. Okay.
Like I think it was for myself, but it's like for them.
Yeah.
So it's like for their reaction.
And so why do you think we always strive for your parents' approval, for our parents to be happy? Like, why do you think that phenomenon occurs
that's like human nature. Like when you're an infant, all you know is your parents' approval. So naturally they're going to be, even when you're like 50 years old, I feel like the first person that you're going to want approval from is your mom and dad. Like no matter how successful you are, you're going to be like, what does my mom say? True. Like, you know what I'm saying? Is she proud? I think it's natural because like it's attachment, like attachment theory. Like there's so much psychology behind that, but your parents' like approval, the relationship you have with your parents is so important for like self-worth, or like how you feel, like approval basically. It's always going to be your parents first.
So when can it become something negative? So for example, when you're placing your entire self-worth on your parents' approval or on getting really good grades, it becomes something that can fluctuate. It becomes something so fragile because your entire self-worth is on those little elements that can change. Like you can get a bad grade. It's like, it's okay. It can happen.
Well, your like self-worth should never be dependent on anything, right? Like in an ideal world, but that doesn't usually happen. I think like there might be a time when maybe you don't do good enough for them on something. Then you're going to feel like so upset. And you're to the point where I don't think it should be affecting your self-worth. Like you can feel sad about getting a bad grade, but like for you to like, you know, have negative self-talk or to feel you're not good enough as a person and like feel so low because of somebody else's reaction, you're going to be having highs and lows all the time. Then what if your mom is just having a bad day and didn't give you a good enough reaction to your grade? And it's not a reflection of you at all, but now you feel horrible.
Yeah.
And then what's going to happen is maybe one day it won't be your parents, like when you're much older. Maybe one day it'll be your partner. Like then you're like waiting for their reaction because that's who you're going to see every day.
Yeah.
What if one day it's like even your kids? Like, you know, like you're always putting it in the hands of somebody else.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it's never going to be completely like stable.
I think that's a really good point, because for me, I always thought of it in the parent sense, like that it's always your parents' approval, but you're right that it can go on in other people's hands, and it'll always be something that is dependent on someone else.
Yeah.
And so that is crazy. And you were mentioning earlier that you could relate this to dating and, you know, dating life, love life. And I think that's an interesting point, because that just means that if your self-worth is always dependent on an external outcome like your grades or your academic success, then you will try to fill that. If, for example, you're not good enough there, you'll try to fill that gap, void, through other people, someone else. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? How do you think that happens?
I think like it can happen in so many different ways. I think specifically for me, like there are like Sigmund Freud like has a whole theory of like the relationship like a girl has with their dad will affect the partner that they choose, and the opposite. Like, I don't know if you've heard of it, but like a guy, his relationship with his mom will affect the type of woman he chooses or ends up with or chases. So there's like so many theories to this that when I think of it, like my dad was always very strict, and I think all I ever like academically, like I think I'm not talking about strict in the sense of like rules and going out and stuff. I think so even though like no matter what it was, even if it was strict in other ways, it was like I always wanted the approval. Like I was like, just tell me you're proud. And there's so many jokes because people are like getting a brown parent to say that they're proud of you sometimes. Like it's like asking pigs to fly. Like there's literally like, it's not gonna happen, right? And I think for me, all I wanted was like, okay, I'm proud. Like you got like the grades, okay. It was always like, you got the grades, okay, what's next? Now your exam's coming. So what's gonna like, so I think I was always looking.
Not good enough, yeah.
And I think they don't mean it's not good enough. It's like, what's next? Like, you know, it doesn't end. And to me, it was like, no, just tell me, like, when can it just be like, okay, it's good.
That you're good.
Like, I just want to sit back and like
relax.
So I think that what I was always seeking was like approval from my dad. And like, it's more like feeling like good enough, feeling worthy. That's like, I feel like a big word.
Yeah.
Feeling like I'm worthy. And so when I would start dating, like for example, I was in a relationship, like I was in it for like a couple years, first relationship, and I'm like, you don't know any better like when you're younger. I was younger, but I would always like that person wanting you and saying you're amazing, you're good enough, you're worthy, you're beautiful, like all these things, like it's validating. It's telling me, oh, okay, like I can't. So maybe like, you know, my like in the home, I didn't necessarily feel like that, but look, like somebody outside makes me feel it. Oh my God, this is amazing. Like you're like, now I figured out how to like fill that, right? And I do think that this is where sometimes like I notice a lot of people like chasing relationships. It's like you're looking to fill something. It's like because it's like a replacement, and it's very easy because like other than your parents, what's like the next closest human being or like connection that would like fill that? It's probably a partner. Friendships, okay, maybe, but like the next one is partner. So when I was in a relationship, I noticed like, okay, like this void is being filled by something. So I'm very like calm. Like it's not like I'm searching. Yeah. But as soon as, let's say there was like a drop, like maybe I wasn't getting that like validation at some point, I was so anxious, and I'd be like, validate me. Like literally like, tell me I'm good enough, tell me I'm worthy, tell me I'm like a good person, tell me like you want me in your life.
Yeah. And right? As soon as they don't do enough of that, you're like, oh, they don't love me anymore.
Yeah. And that's such a common like it's so funny because like this is like the deep aspect of it, but how it manifests is like, oh, he's not responding to my text fast enough. Oh, he like doesn't want to see me. Oh, he didn't invite me to this. Oh, he didn't call me when he was out. Like it manifests in such minute, like minor things that we don't even realize like what is like the deeper meaning behind why is this bothering me, right? And so anyways, so I like and I think because you kind of are trying to fill that void constantly, it's like a cup that has like an empty bottom, and you're just like pouring, and as when it stops pouring, you're like, oh wait, like now I don't feel good about myself. So I think you end up staying also, a lot of people stay, even our community. How many people stay, I feel like, in marriages and relationships that are not necessarily healthy? Like, I'm sure other cultures too, but like you end up staying in things because it's like, well, I need this void filled. I like the thought of being alone is like scary.
It's so scary.
And it was really like, I am almost embarrassed sometimes to say that now because I'm in a different place, but it's like, it was so scary to me to like not have that validation, because it's like, what do I have to sit with then?
Wow.
By myself, I have to sit with this feeling of, oh, I'm not good enough. That's like the scariest thing in the world. No one wants to feel that.
I think that you just articulated so well, because I think that when you can't feel that when you have that void, when you can't fill that, as you said, you can't fill that cup, you try anyone who could fill it, and if they're starting to fill it, you would just you just automatically start being happy. And even if you know that that relationship is not the best for you, that person is not the best for you, but because they're saying the right things, they're filling that void, they're filling that water, that cup for that period of time, you're good. And you don't, and you settle for that. And like, no one realizes how detrimental that can be to your life and to you as a person, because it goes back to the point of self-worth, because it goes back to the point that you are so dependent on someone else to make you feel good and to make you feel happy. And when we were talking a little about the fact that you were just craving for your dad to say, I'm proud of you. And this was something that, you know, when I grew up, I started to think about more, and I started realizing that we always talk about how Desi households, they have a lack of affection. And I read a lot of articles about this, and there's a pattern. You see that in a lot of Desi households. And what I've come to realize, how I've considered or acknowledged it, is that yes, there is a lack of affection, but I just feel like it's a different love language. That's how I like to put it, because we expect them to say, I love you, to say, I'm proud. I'm proud of you. And that's what we want to hear. I just feel like Desi parents, because of how they grew up, because of their parents, their cultures, their love language is more acts of service.
I was just going to say actions.
Right? Like, I was watching this video the other day where it was like, our parents, they don't say, I love you. They make you a cup of chai, or they don't say I love you, they cut fruits for you when you're hungry, and things like that. And even though my parents, they are a lot more affectionate than what I've seen in other Desi households, but I do know that their main way to show me their love is acts of service.
I think that's so true,
right?
And I feel like I just realized that too. Like, I don't know, I thought maybe it was a Western thing. Like, I thought maybe only Western people want these like affirmations and like tell us that we're amazing, but you probably, like, it's here too, right? Like, you want to be told I'm proud.
For sure. Yeah, of course. I think every individual has that desire. And so when we grow up, we start thinking that our parents don't love us. Like, they don't love us enough. That's why they don't say it anymore. But they do. It's just that they're showing and expressing it in such a different way. And they don't realize it as well. For them, they're like, oh, our child should know that we love them because that's why we're doing this for them. But it's just like love languages. I feel like just different ways of expression. And of course, what can happen later on is, as you were saying, that you would try to fill that void by getting a guy who just says the right things. Even if he doesn't do the right things, he just says the right things.
Because you're seeking that so much because you didn't have it, right? And when you said the acts of service, like the cup of chai, like cutting fruit, like even when I would think back to my own family, like I'm like, when I needed something, who would be there? My dad. Like, he would, when I went to university, like I would literally be like, need the mind, like such a small thing, and he would drive and be like, here you go, because that was the way of showing like love. And I don't think you understand it until you're much older. But then I was like, oh, he's not proud of me, like, oh, I'm not, like, doesn't think I'm good enough. But then it's like, on the other hand, he would be the one who was like showing the acts of service. Like that's how the love was actually shown. I was just not receiving it, I think, you know?
Yeah, because you didn't interpret that as love.
Because I never want to sit here and say that like, oh, Desi parents don't show love, but Desi parents don't love their kids. Like, not at all. I think they do. I think there's just sometimes like a miscommunication almost in like how we want to receive it and versus how they're showing.
For sure. Like when you were talking about your dad, it just reminded me of my grandmother the other day. I remember when I went back home, my family lived 2 hours away. So I went back home and I told them I'm coming. But as soon as I reached, my family, they all left home to grab something from a cafe nearby. And as soon as I reached, I just started feeling so emotional that like, oh, like I'm here. Why aren't they here? Like they just left. So I started like getting emotional. And then my grandmother was there and she didn't like hug me. She didn't do all, she just said, come, I'll make you your favorite food. Just come to the kitchen. And I just went, and then she's like, wait, sit here. And then she went, she like made like chai and then she made like rice and chicken, which I missed a lot. So she's like, just sit and eat and you'll be okay.
Yeah,
like,
that's
and that
how
was
the
just
love is
her.
shown.
Yeah, that was the way she was trying to be like, it's okay, you know? So it's just a different way to show love. And
and I think we almost have to like understand that means they love us. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like, I feel like if you want peace, like, you know what I'm saying? Like you can't keep trying to change, especially older generation. I mean, it would be great if they could start saying, oh my God, I love you, I'm proud of you. But like you almost have to start saying, when they're doing this, that means that they love me.
Yeah.
Like, tell yourself that, right?
I think it is important to have conversations with them where you can express that, you know, I would appreciate, like, it's hard. It's definitely hard to do that, but it does go a long way. Even if it's like the little things that you can tell them, you know, I would like this. Yeah. They do listen. Yeah. They would implement it. They won't change completely. Yeah. And you don't want them to change completely either. It's just that it can go a long way if you have those little conversations with them, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, for sure.
I think people should try to talk. Like, depends how open they are, right? But no.
Yeah, I think like the thing about this is that as you grew up, you recognize that these are things. This is how they express.
Yeah.
But you know what I missed growing up was I'm proud of you. I love you. These things. So when you know that, when you recognize that, you know that that's how you want to raise your kids as well. Yes. You know that. You realize what you would want to do the same and what you would want to do different. Yeah. Which is like in every culture. In every culture, there are things that you unlearn and relearn as you grow up. Like that's just how it is.
Yeah,
right?
very true.
Yeah, exactly. So this was all about expectations and then affection and how that you know goes with how we're raised and things like that. One thing that I was thinking about as we are raised, one thing is that I didn't mention this earlier, but privacy. I think privacy in Desi households is different. What I mean by that is like, I don't know how it is for you, but I do know that they don't want you to stay in your room and like close the door. Like that's just something they don't like that. It's just like, oh, why are you separating yourself? So I think their idea of giving your children privacy is so different because for them, it's not, you cannot just go and close the room door. Like, what are you doing inside? Like, are you hiding something? So what do you think about this concept of privacy in Desi households?
Yeah, I don't think it's like, I think if you were to ask like a Desi parent, they'd be like, what's privacy? Like they would be like, I think it's just the same like collectivistic culture. Like it's just, we're a unit, we're a family, like we're all together, like spend time together. Like, see, I live on my own, but when I go home, like I would never think to go in my room. Like they would be like, what do you mean? Like we're doing so, we're gonna hang out together. Like I remember my dad had this rule, like he was like only one TV in the house because that way, like I don't know if you had that too.
No TVs in the rooms. That's what.
Yeah, even like I remember in the basement because he's like, then we'll be separated. Like you will go watch TV downstairs and we'll be watching upstairs. No, let's watch together. Like, and it was just, I was like, why can't I have my own TV? Like I don't want to watch in the living room. Like family, like I would watch these shows and I'm like, everyone, like I want to watch by myself. And it was like, no, like we're a family. Like we'll watch together. Yeah. So I actually like admire that. You know,
I love that. Like, I love the fact that there are so for example, lunch and dinner we all have to have together.
Yeah.
So no matter what you're doing, you come down, we have food together. And when I was young, I used to get annoyed because sometimes I would be like, okay, I'm working, like I just don't want to eat right now.
Yeah.
And I was just annoyed, like, why? But now I've just realized we have so much work to do during the day. We're all doing our own thing the entire day. This is the only time where we can all sit together and just be a family and be present with one another. And I appreciate that now. Like I think about it, I'm like, I love that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that I know that there's certain times when privacy is important, where it's like, I just don't want to talk to anyone. I want to stay in my room and like close the door. So I think finding the balance between the two is sometimes a struggle.
Yeah, it is.
It's definite in a collectivist society. It's definitely a struggle. And this is what I always tell. I ask my friends, because when they talk about, so my friends who talk a lot about their families and that they love their families, and that, you know, when they grow up, they don't want to live far from their families and all of those things, and that they're doing this for their family. I always ask them one thing, which is that, you know, it's so beautiful, your attachment, your love for your family, but do you forget about yourself in the process? Like, do you forget about your individuality in the process? Because attaching yourself to your family is so important, but it's also crucial not to forget that you are your own person. You have your own opinions, you know, you have your own beliefs. So not forgetting that. And I think for me, I got that back when I moved out of my house. And I'm not saying it had to do with like living in my house, that was the main problem. No, it's just that I think that when I moved out of my house and I started living alone, I just started thinking a lot more as a person, like without asking my family, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think? I would ask myself, what do I think of this? It just pushed me. Like I had no choice. There was no one else around me. I just pushed me for me to think the way how I want to think about a certain situation. So
do you feel like you've found the balance?
It's definitely hard. I don't think you can ever find like a 50-50 balance. You know, it's so hard because, like, for example, now it's been a month since I went back to Elaine, and I think that, like, I feel bad, like I feel guilty every weekend when I don't go back. I feel guilt, right? And it's just, I want to go, but it's not that I don't want to go. It's just that there's this thing that I have to do and this thing, and I have to go here, and I can't go here because you're 2 hours away. So like, I just can't. But there's that guilt.
I think there'll always be the guilt,
right?
I think even when you even if you're married and you have kids, like you would still have that guilt, because I have it too. And it's like, it's always like a voice in your head that's like, well, I should be spending more time with me, like, you know, or sorry, I should be spending more time with them. And it's like, sometimes it's always like, I think that same, like, they've done so much for me, like, who am I to just like run off and not care about them? And it's not that we don't care, we care, but there's just competing priorities. And I have that guilt all the time, because they'll also make like, you know, little comments to like, oh, you haven't come home, or,
they always make those comments.
And I'm like
do they joke about it, or are they like serious when they say, oh, like, can you come back? Or
it's usually a joke, but I think that there's truth to it.
It's
like they're never gonna, I don't think like Desi parents in general are just sitting there having like these like, hey, can I talk to you? Like, no, like that's a very like Western thing. They'll just be like, oh, like you're too busy to come home, like and I'm like
so true. It's always a joke. It's always as a joke. It's so funny because even like if there would be scenarios where I would like get mad about something and say something in a certain way, they like later on they would always be like, you know, the appropriate way to do it is to joke about it, and the other person would automatically understand. And then
I'm like, okay,
I don't know how to do
what kind of communication is this?
Exactly. But that's so true. I think like when they want to communicate something, it's always through jokes. They don't say it directly.
Okay, and whatever. Like,
but it's true. Like you feel that guilt. And it's not all okay. One reason is they're also making the jokes, and one reason is that you're attached to your family, you love them, so you do want to spend more time with them, but you just, you know, there's certain times when you can't.
And you don't want to feel like you just like left them, because they have done a lot for you, especially I think immigrant parents. Like even if they immigrated to Dubai or they immigrated to America, like they sacrificed a lot for you. That it's like, you kind of feel you have to give back, which I think you should give back as much as you can. It's a hard balance.
For sure.
It's very hard to strike. Yeah.
I think that there's so much more that we could dissect here. I think it's very interesting. I love talking about our cultures. I'm very proud being a Pakistani. I can see you're also very proud. And there's so many beauties to our cultures, but I just love, we have to challenge certain norms as well to understand why we are the way we are. So I loved that I got to do this with you today.
Yeah, this was so good.
I hope you enjoyed it. And I had a great time. In the end, we do a little cheers.
Okay, perfect.
So
cheers. I love it.